Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating chain reaction. We're going to map out exactly how natural human differences somehow warp into deep societal divides, and more importantly, how we can actually mend them. Let's deconstruct this ladder of inequality, starting from basic, everyday diversity all the way up to systemic discrimination. But to truly grasp this, we really have to challenge our own psychological defaults. Like, why do our differences sometimes divide us? It's true that we naturally crave the safety of people who look, think, and act just like us. But what actually happens in our minds and in our society when we encounter the unfamiliar? So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the beauty of diversity, then stereotypes and prejudice, followed by the reality of discrimination. After that, we'll ground this in Dr. Ambedkar's story, and finally, we'll look at striving for true equality. All right, let's jump straight into part one, the beauty of diversity, and establishing a neutral baseline. Just consider the sheer scale of India's natural variety for a second. We're talking about over 1,600 distinct languages spoken natively as mother tongues. Think about that. Being different isn't some weird anomaly here, it's literally the statistical norm. This diversity is completely woven into the country's DNA. All 8 major world religions are practiced here. Plus, there are over 100 unique, celebrated dance forms, and they're all shaped by these drastically diverse geographical climates. It just creates this incredibly rich, shared cultural foundation for everybody.
To put that into perspective, just look at the contrast between different regions. You've got Kerala, right? Defined by warm backwaters, spices, and a vibrant mix of Christian, Muslim, and Hindu communities that were shaped by global trade over centuries. Now contrast that with Ladakh, a high-altitude, cold Himalayan desert deeply rooted in Buddhism. These are completely disparate environments, basically different worlds, and yet they share the exact same national unity. It's pretty amazing.
Okay, moving on to part 2, stereotypes and prejudice, or what I like to call the psychological glitch. So, the first cognitive glitch we run into is stereotyping. This is when we force huge numbers of people into a single, rigid pattern. And the problem here is that it completely strips away individuality. Instead of seeing a person's unique skills or their actual character, we just shove them into these predetermined boxes based on things like gender, race, or class.
And we see this conditioning start absurdly early. Society demands that boys be physically stoic, maybe a bit rowdy, feeding them that classic toxic lesson that boys don't cry. Meanwhile, girls are suddenly expected to be well-behaved, soft-spoken, and naturally good at domestic duties like cooking. Honestly, clipping the wings of complex individuals just to make them fit these arbitrary societal expectations is deeply damaging.
Now, if stereotypes are the first misstep, prejudice is the dangerous evolution of that. Prejudice happens when we judge other people negatively or see them as inferior, based purely on predetermined opinions rather than actual facts. It's kind of like this arrogant assumption that your way, let's say speaking English, is the superior way, which leads to actively disrespecting those who do things differently. And that bias, it absolutely destroys social harmony.
Which brings us to part 3, the reality of discrimination and how this bias actually manifests. Discrimination is essentially the physical action born from that bias. It's what happens when our prejudices start dictating our behavior, when we actively deny people equal access to jobs, opportunities, or even basic human rights. And it manifests in some truly stark ways, like, for example, forcing people from specific castes or economic backgrounds to use completely separate water sources.
And this kind of exclusion isn't just some abstract sociology concept. It is viscerally painful. For kids who are mocked or completely left out, it creates this immediate real-world hurt and helplessness. We have to remember that these big systemic issues always have a deeply personal and isolating cost.
A really profound historical example of this is India's caste system. Take the term Dalit, which is used by those who are marginalized within this system. It translates directly to the word broken, and that's a very deliberate word choice. It perfectly captures how systematic prejudice quite literally broke people over generations, segregating them and forcing them into specific menial labor based entirely on the circumstances of their birth.
Let's make this a bit more concrete in part 4, Dr. Ambedkar's story, where we look at the human element.
Born in 1891 into the marginalized Mahar caste, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar faced incredibly intense discrimination right from the start. As a kid, he was blocked from sitting with his peers or even drinking from the school water taps. Yet he somehow shattered those barriers. He actually became the first person from his caste to finish college. He trained as a lawyer, eventually became the principal architect of the Indian Constitution, and later in 1956 converted to Buddhism in his search for a truly egalitarian religion.
There's this one specific incident from his childhood that really perfectly illustrates the sheer irrational power of this prejudice. Young Ambedkar and his brothers were stranded at the Koregaon train station, right? And they offered to pay double the regular fare for a cart ride. Double! But the moment the drivers learned they were Mahars, every single one of them refused. As Ambedkar later noted, money did not work. The social fear of being polluted by the children completely overpowered basic economics and worse, basic human empathy. It's just wild to think about.
So how do we fix this? That brings us to our final section, Part 5, Striving for True Equality.
When India finally gained independence in 1947, leaders like Dr. Ambedkar knew they couldn't just leave fairness to chance anymore. They had to legally codify it. Because they so deeply recognized the historical struggles of these marginalized groups, the framers of the Constitution purposefully hardwired equality right into the foundation of the new nation. They guaranteed the right to equality for all citizens, legally abolished untouchability, and ensured absolute freedom from discrimination, giving everyone equal access to public places and government jobs.
And a huge piece of this puzzle is the mandate of a secular India. This means no single religion, language, or festival is compulsory for anyone. By legally protecting and treating all faiths equally, the government uses the law to actively enforce unity and mutual respect. It's all about legally protecting that immense, beautiful natural diversity that we talked about at the very beginning of this explainer.
But here's the thing. Equality isn't just a legal document. It's a daily practice. We've seen how natural diversity is, we've seen how easily our minds can corrupt it with glitches, and we've seen the massive legal effort required to protect it. So I want to leave you with this thought today. Examine your own assumptions. How will you challenge stereotypes today? And how can you actively dismantle